Well, as you know, the First Presidency and the 12 have been engaged in the vital subject of protecting our cherished religious freedoms, which is under attack from many quarters. One of the primary directives from the First Presidency was that the Church should work together with other faith groups to secure our freedoms. Today, Governor Michael Leavitt, we use full names here.
I'm glad to know it.
Is with us to give us an update on what has happened in this important and to show us the road that's mapped out for ahead. We're just delighted to have Dr. Robert P. George, eminent Catholic scholar from Princeton, who will be introduced later as the work progresses. We're also delighted to welcome Louis Tellez, president and founder of Winterspoon Institute, another significant ally in this endeavor. We welcome both of you. All we ask of you is you donate your frequent flyer miles to us. A tithing contribution for being here.
We have plenty already.
So we'll ask Governor Leavitt to make the presentation.
Thank you. May I say before I begin, you've heard the formal introduction of Professor George, but I would simply like to add that the last many months has provided me with a set of insights not listed on that biography. It did not comment on the nobility of his purposes. It did not comment on the gentleness of his manner. It did not comment on the degree to which his competence is depended upon around the world. And I've enjoyed greatly the friendship that has developed between us, and I'm so pleased, Robbie, that you're here. Today our subject obviously has been spoken as religious freedom, and this is the second report that we will have made to this body. Much has happened since then. The velocity of religious freedom activity is clearly increasing. Some of it's good, some of it is not. Just a 6-month sampler in the judiciary. Much discussed Hosanna Tabor decision in the U.S. Supreme Court, considered by many to be the most significant event since 1990 when the Smith decision was handed down. This was a discussion of what role government should play in the choosing of clergy. An important victory for those of us who would defend religious freedom. On the legislative side, Affordable Care Act regulations requiring employers or their insurance companies to pay for contraceptive products and services, no matter what they may have as religious views to the contrary. In state legislatures, we have seen states continue to act to legalize gay marriage. On the other hand, we've seen states begin to push back on various federal requirements on religious freedom grounds. And we've seen new interest begin to evolve in religious freedom restoration acts around the country. On the political front, we've seen North Carolina in the last 2 weeks pass a constitutional amendment in a very positive and affirmative way, protecting marriage. We have seen freedom of religion begin to emerge as a national issue in the context of the presidential election. In some ways good, in some ways not good. Culturally, we continue to see national surveys reporting that people do not value or understand religious freedom as much as they did 10 years ago. It was mentioned that the First Presidency has very clearly instructed the Public Affairs Committee, and their instruction can be encapsulated in this phrase: engage as part of a chorus, not as a soloist. As a result, the Public Affairs Committee has developed a strategy on religious freedom that has 3 parts. Strategy 1, warn members of the church and the world. Second, defend legally. And third, engage with allies in the public policy arena. On Strategy 1, you can see this manifest in several ways. Recent speeches, major speeches by Elder Oaks and Elder Cook and others, carried by world media, underscoring that religious freedom is under siege and that the church is taking a stand. Our social media and websites carrying an introductory series and a lot of news and commentary on this point. The Deseret News editorial board speaking directly on the need to protect religious freedom, again warning members of the church and the world. The second strategy is defending legally. The church has stood by the Becket Fund, a public interest law firm specializing in religious freedom matters. Elder Lance Wickman has now become a member of the board of directors. There are a number of prominent members of the church who serve important roles there. They were a very important part of the Hosanna Tabor case. But in addition to our support of the Becket Fund, amicus briefs are filed on a regular basis under which the church plays a very important role in both coalescing and organizing and writing those briefs. Strategy 3, and the discussion that we will engage in most today, is engaging with allies in the public policy arena. After receiving the instruction to be a chorus, not a soloist, we reached out to our good friend, Professor George. You will see on the screen a picture of His Eminence Timothy Cardinal Dolan, the Archbishop of New York. In consultation with Cardinal Dolan, George crafted with him a strategy to begin to work closely with us. They helped us understand that the Catholic Church operates somewhat differently than ours, and that within the U.S. Conference of Bishops, there would not be a uniform response to this issue, and that perhaps it would be better if we were to engage informally outside that structure with our Religious Freedom Committee. And so our efforts began to build that way. I mentioned previously that part of the last 6 months has seen the contraception issue. That galvanized in a very real way the Catholic Church's response on religious freedom and made it a very important priority of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. In a meeting that I had recently with Cardinal Dolan, he asked me, "Do you believe we're getting the institutional church's support adequately?" And as we discussed it, he said, "I think now is the time for us to move from this less formal structure into a more formal structure." And I hope that Dr. George will comment on that. A very important development because, as you'll see later, they've begun to use what they call their ad hoc committee as the means by which they will engage with us on this issue. In partnership, then, with the Catholic Church, we developed at the Ethics and Public Policy Center what we call the American Religious Freedom Program, or ARFP. The purposes of ARFP are to educate, to prevent further erosion, to expand statutory and regulatory protections on religious freedom. A bit of a timeline on how that's proceeded. We had in August, we hired our first staff member. In November, we held a public announcement of the launching of the organization. In March, we hired a state director that will be more clear in just a moment. In May, we'll have a national conference that will highlight the fact that this group is coming together to fight back. And lastly, in July, we'll have our first set of what I'll introduce in a moment as religious freedom caucuses and networks. In the context of building a chorus of interfaith allies, we have done so by inviting key religious figures and scholars and others to join an advisory board. And I believe you will see this truly is becoming a chorus in the faith community. It is represented from our church by Elder L. Whitney Clayton, by the Catholic Church, Bishop Salvador Cordialoni, who is a very well-respected advocate for religious freedom. The Southern Baptist Convention and Dr. Richard Land. The Orthodox Christianity by Reverend Dr. Chad Hadfield. You will see the Assemblies of God, George O. Wood, a general superintendent, and Seventh-day Adventist Dwayne Leslie. Now, I want to add that we do not have their formal agreement, though they have both individually said they are inclined to, but we're waiting for their church process to bless that but we anticipate it will occur. You can see we have representatives of Judaism, of Islam, and then a group of academics and political leaders. John Garvey, the president of Catholic University, Mary Ann Glendon, who is a respected scholar at Harvard University, Dr. Donald Landry, William P. Muma, who is the president of the Beckett Fund. An important point that we are closely coordinating our legal strategy with our strategy in the public policy arena. And you'll see other noted scholars, one Stephen D. Smith, who is a member of our church, Gordon H. Smith, who, of course, a former U.S. Senator, and Rabbi David Novak. So a chorus is forming. The new battleground for religious freedom is in the states. What we need is organization on the ground. And hence, we are proposing the development, or have begun to develop, religious freedom legislative caucuses in each state and religious freedom state networks in each state. Now, I'd like you to just visualize both pieces because they are independent but work together. Let's take, first of all, the religious freedom caucuses. These would be caucuses made up of state legislators from both parties. They would be part of the formal legislative structure in that state, and there would be leadership elected by the caucus members. The religious freedom networks, on the other hand, the foundation, will be volunteers from various faith organizations. The leadership will be appointed by ARFP, and it will act as staff for the caucuses. So if you could think of that foundation as being a coalition of members of our church, the Catholic Church, the Seventh-day Adventists, and others in the local area, who then will form and support the religious freedom caucuses, you will have the right picture. A little more detail about the religious freedom networks. Again, they will be chartered by ARFP. This gives us a degree of centralized coordination and control. It gives us a point of coalescence for the faith community itself, and it will create some continuity among and between states. In addition, the functions of it will be to monitor and for activity and to gather intelligence. These become listening posts in the states so that we begin to see things manifest earlier and we can get ahead of them and solve them before they manifest as problems. It will be a means to organize and maintain religious freedom caucuses, and it will advance a legislative agenda. And what will the legislative agenda be? Well, first we'll, of course, oppose bad legislation. We'll introduce religious freedom exemption language where it's necessary, and we'll support state religious freedom restoration acts and other protective legislation. The state religious freedom caucuses will, as I mentioned, be organized by the network, and we're working very hard to assure that they are bipartisan and that they are multi-denominational. Their functions will be to provide an avenue for influence in each state. We'll have members of state legislatures in each state who we have identified as being friendly to our purpose, who can begin to not just listen but act proactively. They'll identify sympathetic officials. It'll be a means by which we can channel a distribution of public messages, and we'll have education vehicles that we can begin to keep up to date as new legislators come together. So we envision, and we hope you can, one of these in every state. Now, we have currently achieved beachheads, if you will, in 15 states, and we're at various points in development. We believe by December of this year we'll be in 25 states, and by July of next year in 40 states. But we'll not stop until we end up with a religious freedom caucus and network in each state. In 2013, we'll begin to build a religious freedom caucus in the United States Congress. And we'll begin working to develop what we hope will be a populist movement. There are millions of people, members of many faith communities, who feel deeply about this, and we need to harness up the power of social networking and Facebooking and Twitter and all of the other means to be able to sound that alarm. Our vision is that we'll have a robust social media presence that will enable us at ARFP to direct the response toward legislators and members of Congress, the media, and others. By the end of 2012, we will have this standing. We hope to have 500 contributors, financial contributors, who have given more than just their affirmation, and online followers. By 2013, more, and by 2014, perhaps as many as 5,000 contributors making small donations and demonstrating a willingness to engage on this subject. Now, let me just give you a sense of a hypothetical case on how we would hope this vision could unfold. The picture you see is a building at Vanderbilt University. Vanderbilt is a private university where the administration, responding to a Supreme Court decision, has concluded that faith-based organizations on university campuses cannot participate in the usual way. This is affecting the LDSSA, for example. They're having to move it off campus because they are deemed to discriminate in their policies because they don't believe in gay marriage. If we had ARFP at its full support at this point in time, how would we react? Well, state networks would be acting as listening posts, and we'd begin to detect that a trend was happening in the marketplace of ideas. Then ARFP would conduct research and develop briefings and sample press releases and model legislation, and would communicate to the state networks. ARFP would then develop op-ed pieces and blogs, and state networks would begin to develop customized responses. You could imagine in every state press releases going out with the names of supportive state legislators making comments about situations in their community, not just a national response. And lastly, we would then turn on our social network, and we'd begin to see Twitter. We'd begin to see people who use Twitter and Facebook and Google Plus and all of the other components begin to weigh in and be able to signal legislators, others, and media that the faith community is standing up for religious freedom. We have a national conference, as I mentioned, that will be held on the 24th. Our goal is very directly to communicate the message that the faith community is uniting and that we're fighting back. At the conference, we'll have attendees from various faith leaders from all of the denominations you've seen mentioned and many others. We will actually have state legislative representatives and potential network organizers from 13 to 15 states. And of course, we hope to have news media there too, and expect to. The program will be a series of panels on current topics. There will be a panel on religious leaders that Elder Clayton will participate on, chaired by Dr. George. There will be one among state legislators that will talk about what's going on at state issues, religious freedom in the military, all of which will drive toward this point that we're going to form religious freedom caucuses in every state because we're uniting and we're going to defend religious freedom. That's the ARFP, our three-part strategy. And it's now my pleasure to turn the podium to Dr. George, who will give you his perspective.
I don't use PowerPoint. I'm so medieval that I still tell time with a wristwatch, unlike my students who don't know what wristwatches are, but they tell times with cell phones. And I see that there are some medievalists out there among you as well. So if you don't mind, I'll just sit here and give my presentation. I want to begin by saying how keenly I am aware of the honor you pay me by inviting you to address this meeting. I recognize that it's a very high honor. For me, the honor is increased by the esteem and affection and gratitude that I have for the LDS Church and for the individual members of the Church, the many individual members of the Church at all levels that I've had the pleasure of working with since about 2008. I, of course, want to pay tribute especially to the Church for its heroic leadership in Prop 8, in the battle for marriage more generally, and now in the battle for religious freedom. This is an intense fight. Many people think that it's a losing battle. I don't believe that. but it's going to be a tough battle to win. But we would be in no position to win it on either front, whether the marriage front or the religious liberty front, and I'm going to talk in a little bit about the relationship between those two, were it not for the contributions that the church has made and the sacrifices that faithful LDS people have been willing to make around the country for these values that we so deeply share across the lines of theological difference. I want to thank Mike for partnering with me in this project, which I think is very important. It's been a great pleasure to work with Mike on it. He's a great leader. Mike was a hero of mine before I ever shook his hand, met him in person, and that's because of his leadership in putting into place, when he was Secretary of Health and Human Services, this is very relevant to our conversation today, conscience protections, religious freedom protections in the regulations concerning, federal regulations concerning abortion. They were much needed. They were long overdue. It was under Mike's leadership when he was Secretary of HHS that they finally were put into place, only alas to be abrogated moments after the new administration took power. But Mike led the way, and God willing, those regulations will be put back in place in the future, and no one will need to reinvent the wheel. They'll simply have to go back to what Mike accomplished. Mike, my colleagues at Princeton, I think, would have been tickled by your describing my gentle manner. I appreciated that, and I'm sure they would have been very amused by it. One of the first things I want to say is I want to affirm the importance of what Mike describes as working as a chorus rather than as a group of soloists. A little while after I had the honor of giving one of the forum addresses at Brigham Young University, Cardinal Francis George, to whom I am not related by blood, although I call him Uncle Francis, came and he gave a forum address. And at that forum address, he said many wonderful things about the importance of cooperation between the LDS and the Catholic Church. But to me, the most moving and important was when he said, you know, we have been strangers for 130 years. It's time for that to end. And no longer will we be strangers. We'll be friends and we'll be brothers. And we'll be working together and we'll be cooperating together and we'll be praying together. And I just think that's beautiful. And I think that does reflect, Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, some of the other members of the leadership of the church, I think, can weigh in on this as well. This is what I find, not only with Cardinal Francis George, but Cardinal Timothy Dolan, and with Catholic officials across the board here in the United States and in the Vatican. The feelings of warmth and gratitude toward the LDS Church, even among those who still don't know very much about the LDS faith, is palpable to anybody who deals with them and talks about the marriage issue or the religious liberty issue. They know what the LDS have done to protect the institution of marriage and to preserve religious liberty. And they, like me, are deeply grateful for it. And that lays a foundation for much further cooperation. Now, Mike mentioned that at the beginning, the leadership of the American Catholic Church believed that it would be best on their end for the LDS committee that Mike chairs to coordinate with an essentially lay-led committee, which was formed under my chairmanship, although it did include Bishop Salvatore Cordileone, whom Mike mentioned. And we have worked together fruitfully since that time. But as the assault on religious liberty, and I'm going to be very blunt with you all today, you are dear friends. Many of you are close friends. There's no reason for me to be anything but honest with you. So I'm going to call it what it is, the assault on religious liberty. Since the assault on religious liberty began in earnest, the Church, the Catholic Church leadership, has recognized that it's time for more formal cooperation with the church administrative structure itself. And so, in addition to the work that the LDS committee under Mike's leadership will be doing with my committee, it will now be working with what's called the Ad Hoc Committee on Religious Liberty, which is being chaired by Archbishop William Lori, who was installed today as Archbishop of Baltimore. Now, Archbishop Lori is a very important man in the Catholic Church. He's a genuine leader. He's what we call a John Paul II bishop, which means that's a bishop who is firm and joyful in the faith and very open to the world, and especially to our brothers and sisters in other traditions who want to work with us. So he's the ideal man. Now, of course, some of you will know from your U.S. history that Baltimore for Catholics, Maryland in general, but Baltimore for Catholics is very important. So the signal being sent by the Vatican in sending Lori, who is absolutely focused on the religious liberty question, to Baltimore in the current socio-political context is unmistakable. It's very important. And that Archbishop Dolan tells Mike that he wants Mike's committee now, moving to the next level, to be working more closely with the ad hoc committee and not merely with the lay-led committee that I chair, is a wonderful thing. I can't quite say, Mike, I'll miss you, because we're still going to be, there's still some work for the lay-led committee to do. But it's a very good thing that there will be work with the bishops committee. I also want to point out, since I'm on this topic of Catholic LDS relations, which is something I believe in so deeply, because I think there's so much fruit to be won from this, both for your church and for my church, and for the larger culture and the broader Christian world. While I'm on that, I want to say that below the leadership level, certainly in the intellectual world, you find a degree of LDS Catholic cooperation that I think people 20 years ago would have thought is unimaginable. So the work of Catholic scholars, philosophers, theologians, sociologists, working with LDS scholars, people like Steve Smith, fantastic scholar, constitutional law scholar at the University of San Diego, Catholic University, actually, and work with people like Steve by Catholics around the country is really tremendous, especially in the family area. It's one of the key issues that we have in common concern, the question of marriage, the question of the family. If you look in family sociology, you see wonderful cooperation between Catholic and LDS scholars, and I think that is something very much to be valued and to be promoted. So it's not just at the formal hierarchy level that this cooperation is happening and should be happening. It is happening and should be happening at the lower levels as well. Now, on the issue that we're fundamentally concerned about today of religious liberty, there is an assault going on. The assault is part of a larger cultural struggle. It has to do fundamentally with what it means to be a human being and whether or not we are under the sovereignty of a transcendent and providential God. This is where the battle lines are drawn. If we are under the sovereignty of a providential God who has spoken to man, who has revealed himself to man, a God who shares with us the divine power of logos, of reason, by which we can cooperate with him in achieving his ends, his will for us, then there are certain non-negotiables that are out there, and the people of the LDS faith and the people of the evangelical faith and the people of the Jewish faith, and I believe people of the Muslim faith, certainly people of the Catholic faith, all believe this, and that is that marriage is the union of a man and a woman, that human life is sacred and cannot be disposed of in a utilitarian manner, that people's first and most profound obligation is to God and not to Caesar. Yes, we will render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Our Savior tells us that. We will do it. But our Savior also tells us that we are never to render unto Caesar that which is God's. And for believers in a providential God who has revealed himself and his will to us, that is a non-negotiable. The folks on the other side don't understand that. They don't get it. They think it's a matter of our stubbornness, of our unwillingness to get on the right side of history, of our refusal to go along with what they regard as progress. And so they think they can simply, in the end, force us to yield. They think they can do that to the Catholic Church on the contraceptive mandate, which, Mike, as you know, is not merely a contraceptive mandate, it's an abortion drug mandate. They somehow think that if they just stick it to the Catholic Church, The church will, in the end, yield. They haven't gotten hold of the fact that the Catholic Church can read. People in the Catholic Church can read. We can read the Bible. We know what it says. We will close our believe me, we will close our institutions before we will yield to something that we believe God has said no to. Now, the Catholic Church is the largest provider outside of the government of health, education, and welfare in the United States. On a per capita basis, I suspect it's the LDS. But there are a lot more of us for the moment than there are of you. So in absolute terms, it's the Catholic Church. Imagine the consequences of the Catholic Church being forced to close its institutions. Now, people may say, gosh, it'll never come to that. Who would have thought anything 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, like what's happening now, would happen? I mean, my goodness, 30 years ago, can you imagine somebody saying, a man will be able to marry a man? And that if you don't go along with that, you can have your accreditation pulled if you're an educational institution, your license taken away if you're a psychologist or a counselor. Was that imaginable 30 years ago? That wasn't imaginable. So it's more than imaginable that the Catholic Church, the LDS Church, other Christian denominations, the people of the Orthodox Jewish faith could be forced to close their institutions rather than conform to the will of a government that believes that it is on the side of a higher God than God, and that is the side of progress, or the side of history. So, this is the fight of our lives. Now, one thing I plead with you to not accept, because it's going to be put on the table, it already is put on the table, is what I call the grand bargain. For those who care as we do deeply about religious liberty, the following grand bargain will be offered. If you will yield to us on marriage, if you will yield to us on abortion on demand, we will give you in return full protection of your religious freedom rights, so you won't have to participate in abortions and you won't have to bless same-sex marriages or have your institutions recognize same-sex marriages. That is a fool's bargain. There is no way it can hold or will hold. All the ideas that gave you an abortion on demand began in the intellectual culture. Someone who was paying attention in the early 1960s could see which way it would go. The ideas that gave rise to the sexual revolution, to cohabitation, to same-sex marriage, to the divorce culture, all began in the intellectual culture. In the universities especially, someone who was paying attention could see where it goes. If we pay attention now to what's going on in the intellectual culture, and especially in the universities, Elder Oaks, if we look at the law reviews and what is being published there, we see very clearly, because they feel they have no need to hide it, where this goes. Got the substantive victories on abortion and on same-sex marriage first. Yield if you have to. Formal religious liberty or conscience protections. And then we can spend the next 10 years, one by one, eroding them and taking them away, because every recognition of religious liberty is an insult to the equality of LGBT people. What we are being offered in the grand bargain is no bargain at all. It's a 3-card Monty trick. Believe me. And it will not hold. Do you want to know how the best way to defend religious liberty is? Defend the substantive values, the respect for which has placed our churches and our people's religious liberty in jeopardy. If we protect the sanctity of human life, in the end we will not have to worry about people forcing our physicians to perform elective abortions or to refer for abortions or dispense abortifacient drugs. If we win the substantive battle for marriage, we will not have to worry about all the bad things that are going on now in the religious liberty area as a result of refusal to recognize same-sex marriages, the accreditations being taken away, the licensing being taken away. For heaven's sake, in Massachusetts, I just learned coming over here from my friend Paul Edwards of Deseret News, he now has a case that's been reported to the paper where a young woman from a family, he didn't say whether it was an LDS or an evangelical or a Catholic family, I'll bet it was one of them, in a Massachusetts school, a family that believes in conjugal marriage, traditional historic marriage, because that's what her faith teaches, that's what her tradition teaches, that's her family's moral view. Well, she's subjected not only to gay propaganda all through the schools, to day of silence days, to re-education, what the old communists would call re-education training and so forth. No, that's not enough. Because she's a kind of shy girl, we all know shy little girls, and a little withdrawn, her guidance counselor takes her in, 12 years old, to say, well, she's noticed she's a little shy and backward. Does this have something to do with her sexual orientation? What about the parental rights of those parents not to have their children subjected to something like that? What about the religious freedom of those parents? That all went up in smoke when the state of Massachusetts decided, the Supreme Judicial Court of the state of Massachusetts decided to impose same-sex marriage. And then from there, of course, the logic leads to that guidance counselor's office and that poor little girl, 12 years old, who's shy enough already, being asked by a teacher whether she's thought about her sexual orientation. Well, I've gone on for too long, but I appreciate very much the opportunity to be with you today and the honor that you have paid me, the general authorities of the church, to give me the opportunity to be with you.
Michael, you'd like to address some questions if there are any?
Well, we'd be pleased to do that.
I think I won't have a question, but I'll have a statement. If they think we will move on these issues, they do not know us. Never will we budge on these fundamental things. If they think we will, they know very little about us. Amen to that.
God bless you. Mr. President.
President, speak.
This question financially. You're thinking now that you're going to broaden the donor base by trying to get smaller donations.
We anticipate.
Understand that just a little better.
Thank you. We anticipate broadening it by seeking smaller donations. Here's the reality of smaller donations. Over a period of time, you gain a lot of them, but it costs some money to get them. But what you get is not just a donation, you get a subscriber who begins to pay attention to the issue. And so we'll likely invest in building up those populations and hope to break even in doing it, and hopefully at some point have 100,000 people who have made a donation and who will engage. But we've also begun the process of seeking others who could make meaningful contributions. I've had a very good meeting with the Knights of Columbus, for example. Carl Anderson has given us great reasons to be optimistic that they, in fact, may be willing to be of assistance, and we'll seek others. But our plan is to seek both large and small donations going forward.
Good.
Go ahead, Governor. The caucus and network strategy, I may have missed this, but is that going to be at the lay level primarily, or does that have institutional implications?
Thank you. If you remember the diagram, there was the foundation of the network, and on top of that, the caucuses. The foundation of networks will be lay people. Imagine a member of our church, likely a member of a public affairs committee somewhere,
Yep.
A member of the Seventh-day Adventist, a member of the the Catholic councils. Is that the right term, Robbie? One of the things that Archbishop Laurie has unlocked for us is an introduction to all of the Catholic councils in every area, which is a group that deals with public policy matters. And so we're now seeking them out to do the same as we would have our Public Affairs Council appoint someone who can be assigned to spend time there. The focus on family, the same. The Southern Baptist Convention, the same. So each of these become, in miniature, what we're doing in the parent of ARFP. Their primary function will be then to form a religious freedom caucus in the state legislature. Now, in some states, they have a formal process where the state legislators actually petition the leadership of the legislature to form that. In those cases, we're doing it. We want this to be, of course, bipartisan, and we want it to be as formalized as we can. These people, the legislators, change a lot. The idea is to make these more stable so that as these change, we can educate, and then serve as staff for them.
Robbie, our primary effort here was to have a religious freedom, and I think it's been covered well. You've crossed over, and I think they always will cross over to marriage, and you're chairman of the board of NAM, as well as your relationship here. As you look at Maryland and Minnesota and Washington, can you just give us a snapshot of where you think things are in that at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. The most powerful argument that the media runs on behalf of those who would redefine marriage is that it's inevitable. The redefinition of marriage is inevitable. Get on the right side of history. You'll be left in the dust with the bigots and treated as if you're Bull Connor unless you come along. Time after time when that's put to the people, whether in liberal states like California or Maine or Wisconsin, it's defeated. Conjugal marriage prevails. Most recently, it prevailed by a 61-39 vote in North Carolina. This is a state that is trending more in the liberal direction, although it's a southern state. Lots of folks from the Northeast have moved down to get good, high-paying jobs down there. It's got a large student population in places like Durham and Chapel Hill. It was thought to be a place where a marriage referendum would actually lose. The other side poured an enormous amount of money in. We were being outspent down there by 3-1, I believe, Louis, something like that. And we were still able to win. And it was a state that President Obama carried last time. We were able to win it in a landslide. But each of those victories requires a campaign. And those campaigns require financial support. We don't need to spend at the level of our opponents. They can outspend us 3. I think they can outspend us 4-1, and we can still win. But we need to be enough in the game. We need the resources to be able to get our message out. We know the message that works, and it's basically just to tell the truth about marriage. So we know what works. We can do it. We can win as long as our side doesn't lose heart and lose hope, and by the other side's, back ourselves into the other side's belief that this is inevitable. We also need first-rate people. Now there, we're so fortunate to have Frank Schubert, who has run campaigns starting in California and just won by this landslide in North Carolina. And we have formed an organization, a company called Mission Public Affairs. You know about it, Elder Cook. And we hope the church will support Mission Public Affairs, become part of it, because you do need first-rate people in each of these places to win the battles. You can't have a situation where in every case you've got local people who have never done this before up against sophisticated, highly trained, well-financed national people who've done it 15 or 20 times. That's what needs to be defeated, and that's what Mission Public Affairs is designed to defeat. Very quickly on the legal front, of course, we're still concerned about what will happen as a result of the constitutional challenge to Prop 8 in California. That was, of course, overturned by a district court. That district court has been affirmed in a very fun, Elder Oaks, a very odd opinion by Justice Reinhart, very carefully crafted opinion, trying to save it, trying to save the lower court's judgment in the case. It's now on petition for en banc review in the Ninth Circuit. It'll eventually end up in the Supreme Court of the United States. I have some confidence because I think events are conspiring to make it very unlikely that the Supreme Court of the United States will go along with an invalidation of Prop 8. So I'm cautiously optimistic there. Things are a little more problematic on the Defense of Marriage Act front. We'll have to see where that goes. That's a series of cases around the country challenging the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. The Federal Defense of Marriage Act is very important to defend for 2 reasons. One, it preserves the right of individual states like Utah or my home state of West Virginia not to be forced to recognize Massachusetts or Vermont same-sex marriages. And number 2, for purposes of federal law, it institutionalizes the conjugal conception of marriage as the covenantal union of husband and wife. The good news on that is we have a tremendous lawyer, Paul Clement, who was the lawyer who did so brilliantly in the healthcare case. You probably heard him on C-SPAN. He's a tremendous lawyer. He did a great job. He's doing a great job leading our fight in DOMA. So on that one, I can't say I'm quite as optimistic as I am on Prop 8, but it's going to be a close run thing either way.
The 4 referenda.
Oh, I'm sorry. You asked me about the 4 referenda, Elder Cook. Minnesota, things are looking good. We seem to be consistently up by about 5 points there. That looks like 55-45, which is what Wisconsin looked like toward the end a few years ago when it ended up being 59-41. Maryland, there everything's going to depend on the black clergy. And I think that the black clergy have been energized by President Obama's, to them, shocking, to me not shocking, announcement that he was in favor of same-sex marriage. I've been stunned by, been closely in touch, as you can imagine, in the past few days with our black clergy leaders in the marriage movement around the country. And they genuinely believed President Obama when he said that he was against same-sex marriage. So they're absolutely stunned. They're outraged. So our hope is that this energy that they now have will carry us to a victory in Maryland. Maine is going to be difficult. And it's absolutely imperative that we win in Maine. If we lose in Maine, that's bad for 2 reasons. One, it would be our very first loss and will feed the media narrative of inevitability. Number 2, it's the first time the other side took the issue to the people. In every other case, 32 out of 32, we took the issue to the people. They're saying we want to take the issue to the people. We're confident enough in our own position that we'll let the people decide. So we have to win there. Our organization, NAM, is active in all of those areas. We're stretched beyond our limits. We need help, but we're in the fight.
Thank you.
Professor, you said that the root solution is to establish the core values, such as the sanctity of life. You've referred to that as the clash of orthodoxies in the past, but how do we do that? Maybe what you've just said is part of it, but what is it that it's going to take to persuade the majority, at least, of the necessity of those values being the ones that govern?
It's very interesting. I got into, I was always interested in ideas, even since I was a little kid, but I got into activism when I was about 14 years old. My dear mother recruited me into the pro-life movement, and she was going to meetings. My mother's not an educated person. My mother hadn't been to college or anything like that, but she felt very strongly about sanctity of human life and started taking me to meetings when I was 14 years old of the local pro-life group in West Virginia. And some of you are old enough to remember, in those times, it kind of looked the way marriage looked today. There was a movement sweeping across the country for abortion. And abortion was a humane solution to women's problems. And so, and it became a feminist cause, although in the 19th century, the feminists were leading the opposition to abortion. It's very interesting. They did a flip. Same with the American Medical Association. And there were even conservatives who said, well, abortion will be a good thing because it's going to keep down the number of welfare people and so forth. And we were told, I can remember this even as an adolescent, we were told history is against you. History is going to move toward more legal abortion. It's going to be like Europe. There's no stopping it. It's just a few elderly priests, mostly Catholics, a few elderly clergy who are opposed to it, and the young people are all for it. And when the old priests and old people die out, people won't even think twice about abortion. Now look at where we are today. More than half of Americans identify themselves as pro-life. And our young people, even at places like Princeton, are more pro-life than their older relatives. The kids are more pro-life than their parents. Now, there are reasons for that. Sonography, these are kids who grew up with a sonogram. They have pictures of their little babies and even themselves, and their little baby brothers and sisters in the womb and so forth and so on. The pro-life movement has played it very smart, incremental strategy, pushing back elective abortion. And so I think that all the signs look very good. We're making progress. In the states, we have lots of good pro-life laws. Of course, we have to get rid of Roe versus Wade to do something finally decisive, but my hope is, it's very realistic hope, that we'll have a future president who will make Supreme Court appointments that will do that. Now, things look very different on the marriage front. things look more like they looked on the abortion front back in the 1970s. But I think to answer your question, the key thing is people need to understand the critical importance of having a mother and a father for rearing children. When people take on board the unique contributions in parenting made by the mom and by the dad, that will be the thing that breaks the dam. People now are intimidated by the arguments on the other side. They don't want to be called bigots. They don't want to be thought of as unsophisticated people or religious fanatics or fundamentalists. And they don't know what to say when people say, well, two men can raise a child as well as a man and a woman. The social science will continue to show something decisive will be out within the next 3 weeks. Luis Tellez is going to be making a presentation about this later to your public affairs people. Right now, everything's secret and embargoed, but important information, important studies coming out June 11th that will really quite decisively show in a way that has never been shown before with a massive study the importance of having a male and a female parent, a mother and a father. And I think that's the message that's the winning message in the end. Intuitively, people know that. Yeah. Intuitively, people know because most people were raised by a mom and a dad. They know what their mom contributed and what their dad contributed. Brad Wilcox, who's a great Catholic sociologist at the University of Virginia, who works with Jason Carroll, LDS person at BYU. Brad Wilcox says there's no such thing as parenting. There's only mothering and fathering. And mothering and fathering are so different that parenting is just a construct. It's not a reality. There's no such thing as parenting. There's what mothers do and what fathers do.
Let me see if I can make this question clear. And it's for everybody, but Governor Leavitt, you may be best positioned to respond to this initially. What does the engagement of ordinary Latter-day Saints look like in the battle for religious freedom? So if we go to Prop 8, we talk about the institution, but ultimately it boils down to a mom and a daughter standing on a street with a sign while people yell at them, spit at them, and do stuff. What does the engagement of ordinary Latter-day Saints look like in the battle for religious freedom? Do you have thoughts about, all of you, but what are your thoughts about what does that look like?
I have thoughts about this. I think there is a day when using the social networking media that hundreds of thousands of members of our church can engage in this debate in a very important way. I'm involved a bit now where I go to large events where there are crowds and media, and I stand behind them and I see the writers and they all have their laptop up, and when I stand behind them I can see uniformly they're looking at the Twitter feeds. Mm-hmm. That's what they write from. They're looking for the hashtags to see who's doing what. There is a movement of mommy blogs that many LDS mothers are now participating in, some of them which have wide circulation and interest. They need to be writing about mothering and fathering and about the importance of religious freedom. That's the way the average member of the church, I think, begins to engage in this. There will be moments in time when a piece of legislation comes up to the Religious Freedom Caucus. They need to be able to call and know who to call. But this is a tool that will allow ordinary people to be heard.
And would you agree or disagree that we have an absolutely overwhelming resource with the rank and file Latter-day Saints, given what you just said?
I absolutely agree.
President, we have used our time up. We want to thank you for coming today. It's been most instructive, most inspiring, and telling us to get to work and do something about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elder Perry.
Thank you. Well, I began where we began. That is that on these issues we will not budge. That's understood. I think our membership understands that if it costs finances, costs time, and so on, I will do that, but we will not budge.
And we will fight.
We will fight.
I suspect that those books in front of you are probably a copy of the Book of Mormon and a copy of the Bible.
Yeah.
In the Bible, Jesus tells us essentially what it means to be his follower. And it's a hard message, but what he says, at least in the version that I've always read, is it means taking up your cross and following him. It doesn't say it's going to be easy. It's going to be pleasant. People are going to love us, throw flowers around our necks and things. It's a hard teaching. Take up your cross and follow him. It's what it means to be his disciple, to me.
The Book of Mormon said it is not common for the more part of the people to desire that which is not right. We believe that